We want to invest in generational entrepreneurs. We don't want to invest in just the average company in space or defense. We want to invest in the top 1% of the 1%. And it is my personal belief that these industries, while they're incredibly exciting and dynamic, and it's never been a better time to start companies, these industries tend to be quite monopolistic. And the reason I say that is because there are only going to be a handful of generational companies built in each of these categories. There's not going to be 100 publicly traded space tech companies or 100 defense tech companies that emerge and rival with the primes. There will be a small handful, probably less than 10 or 12. And so as such, our objective then as a venture firm needs to be to find those entrepreneurs, to partner with them, and to help them accelerate and be successful.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be host of VC the next podcast, and today we have Jonathan Lacoste with us. Jonathan is the founder and general partner at SpaceVC, investing in pre-seed FrontierTech startups. SpaceVC has recently closed $22.5 million Fund 2. In this episode, we talk about the new fund with an expanded focus on FrontierTech, fundraising learnings from raising Fund 2, some breakout companies from Fund 1, exciting opportunities in FrontierTech, SpaceX Vs Boeing in getting back the astronauts stuck in space, his biggest learning investing in startups over the years, and lots more. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast 10x, where I help VCs start and run their own podcast. While I was running VC 10x, this podcast that you're listening to right now, I asked my VC guests, why don't you start your own podcast? I mean, it's the best form of marketing for VCs. As they say, VC is a people play more than even a capital play. A podcast enables you to put your people at the front, your portfolio founders, your partners, and co investors. It's a great way to build a brand and win competitive deals. It activates all your marketing channels in a single shot, be it YouTube or blog post or newsletter or social media. Everything gets activated in a single shot. And I get the same response from all the VCs that it's a lot of work and we don't have the time for it. I said, all right, let me handle the work for you, from pre recording, editing, publishing to making social media clips. All you have to do is show up on a call, hit record, do the recording using the well researched outline we provide you with, and you're done. We handle everything else. You know what they said? All right, let's give it a shot. So if you are a VC and want to up your marketing and branding game, I'd love to work with you. And if you're thinking there are too many VC podcasts already, remember there are way more VC firms out there. And if you're not standing out, you're losing out. So if you want to work with me on starting your podcast, go to podcast10x.com and book a call today. I'll add the link in the description and show notes below. Look forward to working with you. Hey, Jonathan, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast again. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on, and many congratulations on the new fund that you've just raised. Tell us more about the new fund and what changes with the new fund.
Yeah, the goal was to raise a $20 million Fund 2 to follow on to our quite successful Fund 1. We can talk a little bit more about the fundraising journey, but we were very excited to be oversubscribed with a lot of LPs who were excited in the vision and wanted to support similar entrepreneurs to the ones that we're investing in. And so we oversubscribed. We raised 22.5 is the total fund size. That was our cap. And the focus will be FrontierTech and pre-seed investments. And so have expanded slightly beyond just space and defense. Fund 1 was just a space and defense oriented fund. And then in Fund 2, what we really wanted to do was take advantage of all of the great entrepreneurs and friends in our network that were already building interesting solutions in manufacturing, industrials, energy, coming from companies like Anduril or SpaceX, but maybe building slightly beyond just purely space tech or defense tech. And so now with this new Fund 2 vehicle, we can support them in those companies as well.
Right, that's awesome. And let's talk about the fundraising journey, since this is not a very easy time to raise a fund. So tell us about your experience there.
Yeah, I think it really depends where in a venture firm's life they are. So for us, when you're raising Fund 1, 2, and 3, it's equivalent to raising maybe like a pre-seed or a seed round as a founder, right? You have some proof points and maybe early traction, but not years of metrics that are fine-tuned. You have a vision, and so the ability to communicate the vision and the opportunity you see is important. LPs are making a bet on the VCs, like the team itself, just like we're making a bet on the founder and the individuals. So I think what really helped, though, for us in this fundraising process was compared to Fund One, we were able to show the track record and the metrics of what we had invested in Fund One. And luckily for us, our portfolio companies in Fund One, all credit goes to the founders and their teams, are performing incredibly well. And so I think that stood out in a more difficult fundraising environment where a lot of VCs, just if you look at the bell curve, the average VC that's in market fundraising now was deploying capital in 2020 and 2021 when valuations were incredibly high. And a lot of those companies that maybe they invested in have not lived up to those valuations, have struggled. Maybe they raised too much capital as well. That's something that I'm concerned about, is when companies raise too much capital too quickly and they get a little ahead of themselves, or they lose focus on maybe the one singular product that they should be really focused on building or the customer set serving. And so the reality is, we were extremely excited. Of our LPs in Fund Two, 98% of the capital we raised was net new capital. So our Fund One investors continued to support us, but they were smaller investors. So we brought in several institutional fund of funds to help scale with us. So that allows us to not only write larger checks into these companies, but also to follow on in a more meaningful way. So we're really excited.
Yeah, totally. And from raising Fund One to comparing to how you've raised Fund Two, did you see a significant difference in how the LPs are attending those meetings, how fast they're moving in terms of deals and finalizing the deals? If there's any observation on that front.
Yeah, definitely. Fund One, one thing I did not realize before I got into ventures, that a lot of venture funds are deploying and fundraising at the same time. And so for Fund One, that was the strategy we took. We raised some capital, we began to deploy, and then we were still raising that fund as we went. And so naturally, the timeline was a little bit more drawn out. For Fund Two, my objective was to keep a slightly tighter process so that I could, not spend too much time doing both or being out of market. And so from the time that we went to market and began fundraising to when we had closed our full fund was just under 5 months. For context, most funds, it takes 12 to 18 months. And so, again, we're incredibly thankful and excited for our new partners and LPs that have come on board. But I think as more and more LPs have seen significant companies being built in space, defense, more hardware, capital intensive businesses, there's a significant interest in what we call a rotation of LPs moving away from purely generalist B2B software VCs towards VCs that are investing in some of these emerging categories. And I think we certainly benefited from that.
Absolutely. And Fund 2 actually has a broader focus as compared to Fund 1 as well, because Fund 1, I think, was purely focused on space tech. But Fund 2 has a more of a frontier tech focus, which includes space tech and different deep tech startups and all. So tell us more about why the broader focus and what's the opportunity that you saw there.
Yeah. Ultimately, as a venture firm, you have to find the right balance of the capital you raise will dictate what your strategy is. And so that dictates how large of a check you're writing, what stage you're investing in, how many founders you can support, how much follow-on capital that you can write. If you look, though, at the bar that we are aiming to have as a venture firm, we want to invest in generational entrepreneurs. We don't want to invest in just the average company in space or defense. We want to invest in the top 1% of the 1%. And it is my personal belief that these industries, while they're incredibly exciting and dynamic, and it's never been a better time to start companies, these industries tend to be quite monopolistic. And the reason I say that is because there are only going to be a handful of generational companies built in each of these categories. There's not going to be 100 publicly traded space tech companies or 100 defense tech companies that emerge and rival with the primes. There will be a small handful, probably less than 10 or 12. And so as such, our objective then as a venture firm needs to be to find those entrepreneurs, to partner with them, and to help them accelerate and be successful. But when you're investing in 15 or 16 companies in each fund, if you only think that there are 10 or 12 generational companies in each category or in collective, then you start to look at adjacent opportunities. And one of the things that I recognized early was our network and our entrepreneurs were thinking about some of those adjacent areas before we were, and they helped educate us. One of the other aspects that I love about space technology is we define space tech as this industry that has like clear boundaries and edges, but the reality is space tech has so much intersectionality with other industries and other hardware intensive categories. And so, as an example, you could be building a satellite constellation system, but you're still dealing with supply chain management, hardware, development, manufacturability, scaling, manufacturing facilities, being able to sell into government and highly regulated industries and customer sets. Those are a lot of similarities of how manufacturing tech or industrials or even some of the robotics companies that you see emerging today operate. And so there were a lot of similarities in terms of how space and defense companies and the rhythm of those journeys and some of the new adjacent industries that we were investing in. And so it was a natural extension for us. We didn't want to expand into anything that we weren't comfortable with. So we're not going to be doing, biotech or pharmaceuticals or some other things within FrontierTech that other investors invest in. We'll be staying pretty focused on the intersection of hardware and software with a focus and emphasis on space and defense still at the forefront.
Absolutely, that's amazing. And with the expanded focus, I see that defense tech is another area where you've started to focus more on. So, how do you look at that particular area? Because I think we have some ongoing wars in the world as we speak. So, how does that determine the speed of innovation there and the speed of how companies are springing up and the areas they're coming from?
Yeah. Well, I think if you're going to be investing in space, the reality is that you're investing in defense tech because the largest customer of space technologies is, at least in the US government and the Department of Defense and the various intelligence agencies that leverage the geospatial data and information that you can collect from satellite systems. And so we keyed in very early to the importance of investing in defense tech for what we called for national resilience. This idea that with strong defensive systems, it doesn't have to be an offensive capability. It could be protecting our national grid. It could be cybersecurity. All of those elements make up national resilience and keep a society safe and functioning. I do think, though, to your point with the geopolitical tensions that we face today, whether it's in the Middle East, in Europe, or in other regions of the world, the reality is that the nature of these conflicts is changing and the technologies that are required for these conflicts are changing. And that within itself is driving the majority of the investment interest into defense tech, not the fact that there are more conflicts or there's more tension today than there was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And so the reality is that you, as a defense organization or a defense ministry, you are constantly thinking about AI oriented solutions, autonomy oriented solutions. You're moving from a world of a low volume of exquisite, very expensive assets, an aircraft carrier, a nuclear powered submarine, a $1 billion, fighter jet program. You're moving to a world where you're looking for mass manufactured, attritable, low cost systems. And so whether those are drones that we've certainly seen employed, or even different types of robotics, or simply just systems that are slightly less exquisite and at a lower cost but a higher volume manufactured. You'll see electronic warfare and the spectrum interference is something big. We'll see GPS denied environments as autonomy comes to the forefront. So the long reality is that the US defense primes and the legacy incumbents that have built up the defense technologies that most of the countries around the world leverage today are not structurally built for the new reality of conflict with all of these emerging needs and capabilities. And so that's why companies in our portfolio and other great companies are building solutions that bridge that gap, and why so many investors are excited about the opportunity in defense tech today.
Absolutely, a solid thesis there. And so, talking about the investments that you're making, they're all at at an early stage, I think. And when you're looking at deep tech startups at an early stage, a lot of the time, even the core product isn't there in place. They're still in
Mhm.
testing or building it out, right? So, when you're evaluating deals of deep tech startups or frontier tech startups, what do you look for in them, and how do you decide if this is something that's going to even materialize in the first place, and then be actually relevant and made of commercial use in the real world?
Yeah, you're quite right that when we're investing at pre-seed or what I call day zero, oftentimes we're investing not only before there's a product or revenue, but before there's even a company, right? Like as a founder or a founding team have a couple of ideas, we're going through the idea maze together, or they have a couple of slides. And so at that point, your evaluation of a company is essentially the following. It has to be a founder and a team bet because markets change, the products change, the customer set can change. But what does not change oftentimes is the team, and the driving force behind companies is people, and great and talented people. So first and foremost, we're looking for exceptionally talented individuals to partner with. Then we can kind of bring and layer into it our perspective on the markets and the technology. As an early investor, I try to have something that VCs call a prepared mind, which essentially means I spend as much time talking to end customers and thinking about the broader trends within the industry as possible, so that we can have our own viewpoints and theses on interesting opportunities or technology, so that when we meet an entrepreneur who is actually building in those categories, we can have a more intimate and sophisticated conversation, as opposed to maybe learning the basics of what they're building. What's really important and specific to us at SpaceVC and how we judge those types of investments is we specifically look for near commercializable technology. And from a technology standpoint, something that can be de-risked fairly quickly. And so despite the fact that we're investing in frontier tech and deep tech categories where historically you would view those founding journeys as raising a ton of capital and spending 4, 5, 6 years building your initial product, deep R&D, and then being able to field an MVP at year 5, we're not looking to partner with that type of company. We're looking to partner with an entrepreneur who has a really clear product roadmap and vision about what technology in the industry has already been de-risked. Maybe there's a combination or an approach or a new novel approach that they're taking to it that unlocks, a lower cost point or an opportunity that others haven't quite seen. Or we're looking for companies to iterate very quickly. Many of our companies have put a fully functioning satellite in orbit from the time that they founded the company within 18 months, or have deployed assets in a defense field within 6 to 9 months of being launched. So that's the type of speed and iteration that we're looking for. And so that's a key part of our assessment early on about whether we invest in these companies or not.
Right, totally. And talking about Fund One, it had several companies that you backed that are doing really well, right? So, would you like to mention some companies that you backed and what are they really solving for and how they're playing out today?
Yeah, I'll name 3 briefly, and hopefully folks are familiar with them. But if not, I'll give some context. One is a company called True Anomaly. They're based in Colorado, and they do on-orbit security and sensing. So the very short version is we have spent tens of billions of dollars as an industry and as governments around the world, putting extremely sensitive and important infrastructure in space, and we currently don't have a great way to defend those assets from malicious actors or geopolitical adversaries. And so True Anomaly has built software and hardware to help the US government and other governments defend and protect their assets in space. We invested in the pre-seed round, and the company's gone on to announce over $150 million in venture funding and significant government contracts. So that's a great company that not only has performed well, but I'm really looking forward to the next phase for it as well. We invested in a company called Loft Orbital. This will be the second company I mentioned. Loft Orbital is co-headquartered in San Francisco and actually Toulouse, France, which is a bit of the space hub of Europe in Toulouse. Loft Orbital builds space infrastructure as a service. So instead of building and launching your own satellites, if you just have a sensor or a camera that you want to put into space, or if you want to build a satellite constellation but maybe don't have the expertise in-house to manage that process, to manufacture the technology, and to operate it once it's in orbit, Loft Orbital takes care of all of that for you. Since we've invested in the company, they've announced over $300 million in customer contracts that they've closed, and $250 million in new venture funding from some of the best firms in the US and the world. So we're really excited about their progress. The last one I'll mention is a defense tech company called Castilian. They're based in Los Angeles. We were lucky to be invested in it before the pre-seed as the first VC firm on the cap table. They are building a defense manufacturing solution in the hypersonic space, which is incredibly important in the geopolitical conflicts and tensions that we see around the world. And Castilian will be announcing a lot of news shortly. And so it's a company to keep an eye on, but they raised their seed round from Andreessen Horowitz and are performing incredibly well. And so those are 3 companies that we were lucky to partner with and be a small part of those founders' journeys in Fund One. And all 3 of them are doing incredibly well.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing those amazing companies. And since you have kind of a good view of all the different frontier tech sectors that you are interested in. Can you tell us what do you think are the key opportunity areas or gaps that you're still seeing or have identified where you're actively looking for startups to solve those issues?
Yeah, truthfully, this is in venture. There's kind of an age-old debate about, are you thesis-driven or are you founder-driven? In the sense of, as a VC, do you have your own list of ideas and opportunities that you think are investable, or do you have a completely open mind, and when you meet an entrepreneur, you let them lead you to these opportunities in the market? To be honest, I think it's kind of a cop out. And so I try to have both. I try to both learn from founders, knowing that they've spent an inordinate amount of time with customers, doing deep research, really being thoughtful about how they're going to spend 5, 10, 15 years of their journey building. But at the same time, I have a list of ideas and opportunities that we think are interesting. So here on my desktop, I have a sticky note right now of different, kind of interesting technologies or things that we're keeping an eye on. So, just to read from a few of them, GPS denied technologies, space-based solar power, SATCOM software infrastructure, anomaly threat detection for embedded systems. That's a cybersecurity play. Autonomous UUVs, which is essentially a small form factor of submarines, either for cargo delivery or deep ocean floor mapping or for defense purposes. Data center architecture, clean water desalination, next generation networking for data centers. So the point is, within frontier tech, I think there's a lot of incredibly exciting opportunities. I would encourage entrepreneurs to go to sectors and problems that are being overlooked, where there's not a significant amount of talent or capital already fighting in. As an example, AI at the application layer has a significant amount of talent and capital. We're more interested, if you follow the chain of thought process, AI leads to increased compute, which leads to increased data center and GPU and chip layer build out in competition. Underneath that, though, there's an energy question, there's an efficiency question, there's a power grid question, there's a water use question. And so anyways, this layer is where we're spending time thinking about, at least in terms of that specific industry. That being said, I have learned a lot from entrepreneurs that have pitched us on industries and problems that I wasn't aware of and quickly came up to speed on. And we always love those conversations too.
Absolutely. That's going to be very valuable for founders who are aspiring to build a startup to know what are the opportunity areas. And then if something resonates and they align with that, they can go and build that thing. And you are the investor they should reach out to first because you invest at that stage, right? Awesome. And at this point, we are talking when two of the astronauts are stuck in space. And there is some issue in trying to bring them back, right? So can you tell us more about what happened there? Because I'm not a tech guy, and I think most of our listeners are not. What happened there, and what's stopping us from bringing them back as soon as possible, right away, maybe?
Yeah. So this kind of follows the trend of NASA partnering with commercial or private companies to achieve a larger part of its space mission. So instead of NASA with, internally or with a few defense primes building all of their launch vehicles, the old space shuttle program, or currently the SLS or the International Space Station, right? They're increasingly relying on private partnerships. About, maybe a decade ago or so, NASA launched a fixed a cost plus contract for someone to build a human shuttle to be able to bring astronauts to the International Space Station, right? For Boeing, it's called Starliner, and for SpaceX, it's called Dragon Crew. And so essentially, NASA gave out an award to both companies. Thank goodness. They had a lot of congressional pressure to just award the contract to Boeing. Dragon Crew, on behalf of SpaceX, has brought astronauts to the International Space Station multiple times, all successfully, all safely, and affordably too, ahead of schedule and on budget. Starliner, unfortunately, has experienced significant delays. And then this most recent episode, which you're referencing, is Starliner brought two astronauts to the International Space Station, but because of technical and mechanical failures of the Starliner vehicle itself, there were concerns about using that same vehicle, which is currently docked to the International Space Station, to return those astronauts back home. It was supposed to be a short mission. The mission has been indefinitely extended. And now NASA has announced that they will not be using Starliner, but Starliner will return to Earth empty. And instead, they will be launching a Crew Dragon capsule to go and return and fetch those astronauts early next year. I believe February 2025 is when they've announced it, because Crew Dragon is a safer, more reliable method at this point. This is a significant decision, and I think, if anything, it's more symbolic of where we are in the industry, not only within space, but within some of these larger manufacturing heavy industries. Defense is a great example too. Rarely do industries experience a singular moment that kind of epitomizes or symbolizes the passing of the torch from the legacy incumbent to the nimble upstart. And so this could be, and maybe potentially even should be, the end of Boeing's space business as a legacy manufacturer that oftentimes is behind schedule and is a significantly more expensive option than SpaceX or other partners in the industry. What I think is most important is that the astronauts' safety and security are put, first and foremost at the top of the priority list, which I think NASA has done a great job of here. But I think this epitomizes how commercial partners like SpaceX are able to deliver for the emerging and future needs of the space ecosystem and NASA significantly better than Boeing and others. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a egg on the face moment for Boeing, and I'm sure there's a lot of internal discussions and strategy right now at that company about what they should do moving forward.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing what this is all about and the business angle to this. But I'll ask a noob question. I think what a lot of people might also be thinking, when the astronauts are up there, I think surviving is a battle in itself in a completely different environment, right? So are the astronauts right now stuck inside literally the Starliner, or are they able to get to the space station and access things over there as well? What is it like up there?
Yeah, they're in the International Space Station. So the good news is,
Okay.
they're not trapped.
Okay.
International Space Station is not a 5-star hotel, but certainly
Yes.
they have accommodations and access to food and water. And
Oh,
if anything, they're a 2 extra set of hands now to be put to work. Astronauts are actually extremely busy, constantly doing in-space microgravity experiments on behalf of customers or academic institutions, or analyzing data and kind of remitting that to parties on the ground. So yeah, they are, I think on one hand, I haven't asked them obviously, but I would imagine if one did ask them, they'd be excited by a slightly longer extended stay in space, because that's always something that astronauts dream of. But I think it was important to give them clarity on a deadline of when they were able to get home, because being in space obviously does bring a lot of wear and tear on the body and mental health. And so, yeah, they are with the other crews and astronauts that are at the International Space Station.
got it. Got it. That's kind of a relief, because I was thinking, like, I think most people would, that they are stuck in just the machine they were sent in and they're going to be stuck there for so long. So that was insane. But okay, good that they have some sort of support there. And what are your thoughts on India? Because India has been trying to push on the space tech and deep tech uh, ecosystem a lot here in India, and they have also announced National Space Day as well. So, what are your views there? And I think you have invested in some Indian founders as well. So, tell us about that.
I think India has a tremendous opportunity within the space and defense tech ecosystem, not only because of the technical talent and the founder talent in country, but also just because of the emergingly important geopolitical role that India plays, not only regionally, but also on the global stage. I also think it comes at a time in a great shift when the center for manufacturing is shifting, and supply chain lines and alliances are shifting. There's an effort to bring back a lot of manufacturing from China to reshore and nearshore that in the US, but also looking for new international partners as well. And so there's a combination of India to build space and defense tech for its own national security, for its own national opportunities to be a regional and a global leader there, but also to be an emerging partner and to recognize that there is a bit of a manufacturing arbitrage to be done compared to if you were to have all of that manufacturing in Arizona or Texas in the States, as an example. So what I hope for India is We have one investment today, Pixel Space, leading satellite constellation company that does hyperspectral. They've won an IDEX award for a multi-payload mission for satellite bus manufacturing as well. The company's in Bangalore, which I think is a great hub for space and defense tech founder talent, as you know. But what I would say is we are eagerly looking at opportunities to invest in maybe one more Indian company, likely on the defense tech side. Think of it as like the end role for India potentially. And so we're certainly excited to speak to and meet entrepreneurs that are building in defense tech. But what I would say is don't just copy or look at what US or Western defense tech companies like Helsing or Anduril or Shield AI or other successful companies are doing. Think about India's own unique defense needs, the geopolitical climate it finds itself in, the tensions it finds at its borders between Pakistan and China, and the reality of being so close to the South China Sea and the significant, maritime opportunity there is there as well within the Indian Ocean. And so think about it from a first principles basis. What are unique defense solutions that are needed in that region of the world, and build towards that, while also recognizing that you can be a strong and critical ally for the US and NATO and other allies around the world. So we're extremely excited by the opportunity. Naturally, as a US focused firm, we're not going to be investing in a ton of Indian companies, but we would certainly be open to one defense tech company in this fund if we found the right founder mix.
Right, totally, and absolutely agree. India is at a very complicated place where it's located, sitting right next to China, or maybe stuff just in the middle of Pakistan and China, which are not two great friends with India at this point, and just by the ocean. So I think defense is going to be a big, big sector, and I think the government funding is only going to increase and has been increasing from the past as well. So I think that's an area more startups should come up. We don't see a lot of them already, but I think we need a lot more innovation there. Uh, okay, awesome. And talking about the founder traits, right? So since you invest at the very earliest stages, mostly backing the team, mostly backing the founders, what do you think have been the most important founder traits that have been very important in determining if the company succeeds or not? Depending on how you've seen the portfolio one or fund one play out, what do you think has been the most important trait in founders?
There's a couple of traits that kind of are concentric circles that you need a combination of them. You can't just have one or the other. But I think the most important throughput across all of our most successful founders is tenacity, determination, an ability to focus and have absolute clarity on what needs to get done, what the priorities of the organization and team are, regardless of if you're 5 people or 500 or 5,000 people. And an ability to run through walls and, pardon my French, get shit done. The ability for the founder to just through will and hard work guarantee success against all odds, and to rally the team to his or her side. That is the most common trait. Of course, what comes with that are certain technical or commercial capabilities, a certain level of intellect. I think intellectual curiosity is incredibly important for founders when they're starting companies, and that's something that we push on as well. But I think that tenacity and ability to just push through is most important, just given that the journey of building a company is incredibly difficult. I also think maybe I'll comment on this past weekend on Twitter/X. Paul Graham released an essay titled "Founder Mode," and it's garnered a lot of conversation and attention and debate about what is founder mode and is it good or is it bad. And I think to your question around traits of founders that we look for, or how we think about founder mode, for me, founder mode and the ideal traits for a founder, it does not mean that one needs to micromanage or to play hero ball where the founder has to be the one to figure out or know the answer to everything, or or as an excuse to be a jerk. That is not founder mode to me. I think founder mode at its best is when a founder, through maniacal focus, has the ability to put hierarchy and corporate isms aside to go at the most important problem at any stage of the company, no matter how deep or wide it is experienced, and to pull resources and the best talent at that company to solve those problems. And so whether it is, there are countless great examples of founders doing this throughout history, but Elon is a consistent example of one side of founder mode where he's able to go deeply into whatever the problem set is and to pour his full energy and attention into that and to pull resources from across the org to solve that problem. So those are traits, those are capabilities that we look for, even though we're investing in founders oftentimes when it's just them and one other person. Those are traits that we're testing for, and we like to understand if the person has the ability to tap into that as the organization and the business scales.
Absolutely. And let me ask you about this. So what is the portfolio construction approach you're taking at Fund 2, since now you're not just focused on space tech, but also all these other areas, defense tech, deep tech, and all. So what's the portfolio construction approach you're taking there?
I think it's really important for founders to understand the portfolio construction of the VCs that they take capital from, because without saying it directly, or maybe understanding it, it directly influences how VCs think about you as a portfolio company, and maybe how important you are to their overall success or not. And you want that to be aligned. You want those incentives and motivations to be aligned. So with that being said, we are highly concentrated investors, which means we will only invest in 15 or 16 companies per fund. That is a very small number compared to the average fund, especially at our stage. Typically, you see companies, or firms rather, that are investing in 25, 30, 40, I've even seen 100 portfolio companies. If you are a part of a VC firm that has 50 portfolio companies in a fund, they're just playing a numbers game. Your outcome and success does not mean that much to them. And as such, they likely will not pour as much of their network, time, capital into ensuring that you are successful. If you're one of a portfolio of 15 companies, your outcome is extremely important to that venture firm and to that GP. And so for me, it allows me to be maniacally focused on helping each of our companies to get really involved, to make customer introductions, capital introductions, government introductions, to ensure that they're successful and able to graduate to the next stages. And so we don't have firm rules on across the sectors we invest in, how much of a percentage it's allocated across. I suspect it'll be roughly 1/3 or a quarter space, 1/3, a quarter defense, and maybe 1/3 to a half FrontierTech. It kind of depends on the founders and the market. But what will certainly not change is we're only going to invest in 15 to 16 companies and be a really significant part of those founders' journey, and typically be the first VC or very early VC investing and supporting them.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And coming to the last main question before we try to close this out, and this is what's been your biggest learning investing in startups as a VC for the past 4 years?
It's been really fun. I, as you know, was a founder for 10 years before I launched this venture firm. I dropped out of college and raised a lot of venture capital and dollars for an enterprise software company, and we sold. And so I had a certain perspective of venture and was very familiar with it from having raised 80 plus million in venture on the founder side. But I have a very different perspective now being on venture. Look, I'm very pragmatic. I'm very direct. I think one aspect of venture that sometimes gets lost is that almost all VCs and all VC firms are still trying to figure it out. Everyone is learning. So despite the confidence or the bravado that you may see on Twitter or in LinkedIn statements or at conferences, everyone is learning together. No one has a crystal ball to predict where the future goes. And so what I would say is, for founders, it is more important to find and to prioritize VCs that have some relevant operating experience that can be a partner to you on your journey, that have the ability either through network or capital, or access or strategic thought to be a super important partner to you as you build your company. That is more important than to prioritize which firm you think you will get the most buzz from on press release day when you announce the fund, but then they've done very little to help you succeed since then. And so what I would say to founders about what I've learned on the venture side is the most important inflection points for VCs and founders are when things aren't going well, and those strategic conversations between a VC and a founder, the introductions a VC can make that help open the door that then the founder runs through and it helps open and introduce another chapter of growth. I try to just be a brutally honest and strong partner for our founders, and do whatever is best for them and for their company's success, and to be a strong, consistent partner throughout their journey for whatever they need. I've taken that from my experience as a founder and having raised from venture firms that I had good experiences from and maybe less good experiences from. And so I try to emulate that and be the best partner I can be for our founders now.
Totally. That's amazing. And now let's do the rapid fire round wherein I'll ask you 6 quick questions about the investing you're doing to Fund 2, and you have to give 6 quick answers, right? So, number one is, what are the sectors and regions you invest in?
We invest in FrontierTech. We define that as space, defense, manufacturing, industrials, and adjacent software and AI that serves those categories. And we invest primarily in the US, but we do have one company in India and 2 companies in Europe.
Awesome. What's the typical stage of investment?
Day 0. So I define that as incorporation stage, but certainly pre-seed is our focus. Seed rounds have gotten quite large, so most seed rounds aren't a fit, but sometimes we do seed as well.
Right. Do you lead rounds?
For pre-seed, we can.
Okay. What's the typical check size you put in?
$750,000 to $1 million US as an initial investment.
Got it. Where can founders get in touch in case there is a direct way?
We have a website where there's a great founder portal, SpaceVC.com, if you want to reach out there. You're also welcome to find me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Lacoste, or on Twitter, @LacosteJonathan. Feel free to DM or message me in any of those ways.
Awesome. Last one. Where can our listeners follow you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Twitter and LinkedIn. So I would say @LacosteJonathan, or our venture firm has a handle as well, @TheSpaceVC. You're welcome to reach out to us there or via LinkedIn.
Awesome. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes below so that our listeners can get there easily. Thanks so much, Jonathan, for making time for this. It's been a pleasure hosting you again.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.